There are some things you will not notice reading your Bible. I read the Bible, I don't know how many times, 60 or 80 times now, but some things you don't notice until you graph it out like I've done in this chart, this longevity chart. When you graph it out, all of a sudden you say, wow, I never saw that before. For instance, you will not notice until you graph it out that Adam lived long enough to know Lamech. Noah's father knew Adam for 56 years. Look at the seminar notebook graph there, or same thing here, but if you look in your book, it's just amazing when all of a sudden you realize how many generations back did Noah actually have an opportunity to meet. How many of you met your grandparents? How many of you have actually met your great-grandparents? Has anybody ever actually met your great-great-grandparents? Nobody in the room. Look at Noah. He could have known Methuselah, his grandfather. He couldn't have known Enoch because he left early, okay? But then he could have known Jared. That would be his great-great-grandfather. That's 2 generations. He could have known Mahalalel. That's his great-great-great-grandfather. Canaan and Enos. He would have missed Seth. But he could have known his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. I bet they could have told a few stories, you know. Can you imagine Adam being able to tell his kids and grandkids and great-grandkids what it was like in the Garden of Eden? Imagine a family reunion back in those days. Okay, everybody hop on the camel. We're going to go visit great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Adam. And he's going to tell us what it was like in the Garden of Eden before the first woman ate the first man out of house and home. Or whatever happened back then. But she did eat and they were kicked out. Some people say, did Adam ever have a date with Eve? Well, most people think it might have been an apple, but the dates in the Bible add up to 6,000, and you don't catch some things until you graph it out. For instance, some people are getting these things and using them for placemats at their table when they have company over. That'll start a conversation. We have them in laminated form, real heavy 10 mil lamination, expensive stuff, like a driver's license. But they're $5 a piece for the colored ones, and you can get them in laminated for placemats or something, or just hang on. Some people mount them on their wall and posters and frames and stuff like a picture. It really stirs a conversation. Like, wow, what is that? Some people try to teach that the Bible was handed down generation after generation after generation. You ever heard that before? Look at your chart. Is it possible that Adam knew Methuselah? Take a look at your chart. By several hundred years, right? Is it possible that Methuselah knew Shem, his great-grandson? They could have known each other for 100 years, right? Look how far Shem lived after the flood. Shem could have known Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So here you got Adam telling the story firsthand to Methuselah, Methuselah telling it to Shem, and Shem telling it to Abraham and Isaac. And if anybody argues or questions their story, you go back and check with the source. He's still alive. I don't believe you. Oh, let's go meet him. Come on, let's go. Get in the car. I'll take you right now. It's also interesting, if you read through the book of Genesis, if you get the Defender's Bible, Henry Morris's Defender's Bible is just awesome. We sell it to our ministry. You can get it through ICR. In Genesis chapter 2, he's got an amazing footnote down here. Eric, I don't know if you had a chance to read that yet, about the 10 different teledoths. Oh, it's like, wow. About 150 years ago, some German higher critics began to criticize the Bible because they noticed as they read through Genesis, it appeared like there were 4 different authors. And so they had the JEDP, I think is the initials for it, the Yahwist, the priestly. And they said there's actually 4 different people that wrote the book of Genesis. And, you know, it comes from 4 different sources, and it's just a compilation of, you know, myths. Well, they blew it. There's actually 10 different authors to the book of Genesis. No place in the Bible does it say Moses wrote Genesis. Moses was the editor of Genesis. Moses wrote the next 4 books. He wrote Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, but Moses did not write Genesis. He edited it. What happened? God wrote part of Genesis, and apparently gave it to Adam. Adam wrote part and passed it on. Noah took some of the book of Genesis on the ark with him. Noah wrote some. There's a phrase you look for as you read through Genesis. It says, "These are the generations of." That is their signature. I'm signing off. I'm handing it to somebody else now. Let me show it to you here. Genesis chapter 2 and verse number 4. These are the generations of. That phrase appears in Genesis 2:4. It appears in Genesis chapter 5 and verse 1, chapter 6 verse 9, chapter 10 verse 1, chapter 11 verse 10. Too fast? Chapter 11 verse 27, chapter 25 verse 19, chapter 36 verses 1 and 9, and chapter 37 verse 2. What's happening here is they're passing on the baton. They're signing off saying, these are the generations of Adam. Then somebody else takes over writing. So to scoffers that are saying Genesis is written by 4 different authors, no, it's written by 10 different authors. But all of them were eyewitnesses. This wasn't a story passed down generation after generation. This is eyewitness accounts. And it's just an amazing footnote there that Henry Morris has, and it's probably on their website, ICR, which stands for Institute for Creation Research, icr.org. If not, I'd recommend you get the Defender's Study Bible. It's just tremendous. We have them in leather. Dan, did we ever get those in? Just burgundy only in the leather. Otherwise, you can get them in hardback, and they're like $50, aren't they? 35 for hardback and 50 for the leather. But that's awesome footnotes there. You may want to read that. Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, his explanation of the 10 different. It's called a teledoth. I closed it because I don't know how to spell it, or else I'd tell you right now. T-E-L, adoth. But the Bible was not handed down generation after generation. Now, you need to be aware that there is a little controversy on one date on this chart. And it's spelled out. If you look in the notes on your timeline, I think it is note number... It's about when was Abraham born. Which note talks? Well, let's see. Look at note number 13. All 10 of Abraham's post-flood ancestors, even Noah, were alive for his early life. There is a discrepancy about Terah's age at the birth of Abram. I have marked on my chart that Terah was 70 when Abram was born. You see that on there? There is an interesting note in one of Henry Morris's books, and it's listed there. Which is the name of the book? I forgot to... no, the Genesis Record, where he explains about this controversy about how old was Terah at Abram's birth. Terah might have been 130 when Abram was born. Either 70 or 130. There's a 60-year discrepancy in there, okay, about Abram's birth. So you just need to be aware. I'd recommend you get the book noted there and read that passage if you want to know. Because some people may nail you on that, and you need to be aware. You say, oh, yeah, I've heard about that controversy. I read all the stuff and decided to go with the 70, though I'm aware that it really could be 130. That's about the only date I'm aware of where there's a real discrepancy in the genealogy, and it'd be worth reading the notes just so you can say, yes, I've read that. I know about it. Okay. Shem, though, lived long enough, certainly to know Abraham and Isaac, and possibly Jacob, depending upon which date you put for Abram's birth. It may slide the scale over 60 years if you use the 130 for Terah's age when Abram was born. And it goes into all the genealogy stuff. It gets a little complicated, but it's interesting to study. Shem was? They could have gone anywhere. These people could have gone anywhere. They had the whole world. Shem and these guys. They were allowed to go anywhere. Later, Abraham was called out of Ur of the Chaldees, which is over in Babylon, Baghdad, basically, to come over there. But nobody knows where Shem lived, or Noah. How long did Noah live after the flood? Where did he live? What did he do? Right, against God's judgment. Right.
So I know he didn't take Shem.
Well, Shem might have already been there. Maybe that's where Shem lived. When Abraham went to Israel, he met a guy named Melchizedek, the Ancient of Days, without father or mother. Well, since everybody else probably still had their father and mother still alive, to meet somebody who didn't, some people think Noah or Shem was Melchizedek. I wouldn't be dogmatic about it, but that is a very interesting theory and certainly a possibility. And Melchizedek lived in Jerusalem. At the time, it wasn't a city. All right, while we're on the subject of what did Noah and Shem do after the flood, I mean, they did live a long time. You got to keep in mind, they're living on a devastated planet. Everything is destroyed. It's like Gilligan's Island. You got nothing to work with. So probably just survival was a full-time job for just about everybody. Kind of like the pioneers, Daniel Boone and those guys, you know. You work 16 hours a day just to get food on the table. That would certainly be the case for the first 100 years after the flood, maybe. I don't know. But I'm sure it was a difficult life for a while. But in Numbers chapter 6, it says, "They shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them," God said. In 1 Kings chapter 9, the Lord said unto him, "I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built to put my name there." God says, I'm going to put my name right there. 2 Kings chapter 21, "And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord said, In Jerusalem will I put my name." Stay with me here now. 2 Kings chapter 21. "In Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, will I put my name forever." 2 Chronicles 33. "In Jerusalem will I put my name forever." You say, who cares? Well, watch this now. If you look in Psalms chapter 119 in your Bible, you may have a Bible that tells the Hebrew alphabet. I think there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. The letter Shin, S-C-H-I-N, with those, this is the Hebrew letter that is the single letter that represents God. If they want to say God's name in one letter, they write this Shin. You follow this now? Notice the shape of the Shin. It's 3 lines coming up kind of at an angle. Notice the valleys in Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem with the valleys is laid out in a Shin. Go to any Hebrew temple, go to any Jewish house. Almost all of them on their doorway someplace will have a little Shin. That's God's name. And God said, I will put my name in Jerusalem. It's right there. Pastor friend of mine from Milton showed me this. He said he was in Israel taking a tour with a secular tour group. He'd been on the Christian tour groups a couple of times. He decided to go with the secular group. And this Jewish guide is showing him around. And the Jewish guide knew he was a pastor and said, well, Pastor, do you have anything else to add to our tour here? He said, sure. Put the map of Jerusalem back up there, would you please? He said, you see this valley right here, and this valley right here, and this valley right here? And the guide said, oh, it's a Shin. He'd lived there all of his life and never saw it. So some people think Noah, excuse me, some people think Noah and or Shem, not Shem, Shem lived in what today is Jerusalem. If one of those guys was Melchizedek, that certainly would be a good type of Christ. Noah would certainly be interesting, having lived through the flood. Now, I don't get dogmatic and I don't preach it that it's a fact, but it's just an interesting sidelight. Since we're chasing all the rabbits on this course, that's something fascinating to study. God did put his name in Jerusalem. Later on, a fellow named Abraham went to sacrifice his son. He took his boy and the wood and climbed up a mountain. Guess which mountain? Right in Jerusalem. Later on, Jesus was crucified. Same mountain. Right in Jerusalem. All this happens in the same place. And it could be that that's where Noah and Shem went and lived. Now, some people think that Noah and Shem built the Great Pyramid. I don't know that that's true, but that's an interesting thought. Somebody certainly built the Great Pyramid. It's a strange one compared to the other pyramids, and I think it's worthy of study One guy, Hank Hanegraaff, gets all upset with me because I mentioned pyramidology. He never has called me, but he's blasted me several times on his radio program, The Bible Answer Man. And I tell everybody, well, tell him to call me. I can defend my position. In my seminar, I say, here's what some people think, that the Great Pyramid might be a structure, a temple to the Lord. It's got all kinds of Christian symbolism in there. Some people think it's just a heathen symbol. Some people think it's one of the star group, from Orion, I believe it is. I don't know. I just think if you're going to be a student of any subject, you ought to look at all the sides of it. So I just say, hey, here's what some people think about the pyramid, the Great Pyramid. So it could be indeed the temple to the Lord or a witness to the Lord in the land of Egypt. Don't know. But Shem and Noah certainly did something. I think, if nothing else, they took incredible wisdom and knowledge that had been gained in the 1,600 years before the flood, and they tried to pass it on to the next generation. Now, today there are all sorts of Masonic lodges type things, who think they have the wisdom of the ancients. You got to be really careful about going down that road, because that's certainly, the average Mason doesn't know what he's in until he gets up to the top and finds out he's been in a satanic organization all of his life. They won't know that, and it's hard to tell them that because they get mad at you. But read the book by Schoenbeam, or I will get into that in video number 5. All right. Shem lived long enough to know Abraham, Isaac, and possibly Jacob, depending on where you put Terah's age at Abraham's birth. Interesting verse in the Bible. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, Jacob got married and then got married again and got married again, and his 4 wives had a contest as who could have the most kids. You know the story when you read through Genesis. He ended up with 13 kids. 1 girl, 12 boys. They became known as the 12 tribes of Israel. Those boys got mad at their brother and sold him into slavery. Which brother was that? Joseph, right. Sold him to be a slave. Joseph goes down to Egypt, ends up getting in trouble. He's trying to be nice, but they end up throwing him in jail for Potiphar's wife who tries to seduce him. And an interesting story there. He just does what's right and ends up in jail for 17 years. He rises to the top and becomes the jailer's assistant, even though he's got to stay in jail. The jailer gives him run of the jail. And he interprets the dreams and all this kind of stuff. Bottom line is, eventually, Joseph becomes vice pharaoh, or whatever they called him, okay? And so he becomes the assistant to Pharaoh. And Joseph sends his brothers back to get Dad. Remember the story there? They all come down in the wagons and they move into the land of Goshen in Egypt. They get stuck there for 400 and some years, as made slaves out of later, when there got to be about 2 million of them, and Moses leads them out 400 years later. But Jacob is being introduced to Pharaoh. Here's Joseph introducing his dad. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob in Genesis 47, very interesting passage. Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been. Now, let's stop right there. Remember, Jacob is the one that tricked his own brother out of his birthright? He tricked his brother a couple times, didn't he? Later on, Jacob got tricked. They said, oh, here's Joseph's coat. He's dead. The trickster got tricked. I think there's a verse in the Bible about something like that. Whatsoever you sow, that shall you also reap, right? And boy, Jacob sure did. And he said, I've lived 130 years, and they've been few and evil. And a person that lives a wicked lifestyle, his life it's hard. The Bible says the way of the transgressor is hard. People that don't live for God have a hard life. Their conscience bothers them, all looking over their shoulder, see if somebody's going to catch up with them for something. Man, it's great living for God. You don't have to worry about what other people think. You don't have to worry about getting caught because you're trying to do what's right. But then he said, the days of the years of my life have been, and he said, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers. Why would he add a phrase like that? Pharaoh, I'm 130. I've had a rough life. However, I'm not near as old as my fathers. Now, let's go back and look at the chart. Jacob, the guy who said this to Pharaoh, could have known Shem, Arphaxad, Selah, and Eber. How'd you like to meet somebody 460 years old? Interesting thought here. We'll have to quit in a few minutes, but as a person gets older, the bones in the forehead get thicker. They get thick-headed. Some people do it when they're young, but it really happens when a person passes 100, strange things begin to happen to their physiology. For instance, as a person grows older, if they're still producing a certain hormone from the pituitary gland, I believe it is, their ears start to get longer. You ever seen old people that got real long ears? Or the nose gets wider. The disease is called acromegaly, excess secretion of hormones in old age. But there's a great book called Buried Alive, which deals with the so-called cavemen. We'll get into more of that later. But he goes through how that some of the skeletons they're finding with the bigger eyebrow ridges are just people who were living past 100. That's all. They're not. Neanderthals weren't primitive. They're same size as us, brain bigger than ours, just got bigger eyebrow ridges. And so they interpret this as evidence for evolution, when actually it's probably evidence they were living longer. Well, if you've got a whole generation of people that are living to be 400 years old, I mean, this went on for several generations, didn't it? Maybe what they're finding are the skeletons of these folks that are post-flood. They probably buried them somewhere, don't you think? Where are they? Well, I don't know, but it's just a thought that maybe some of the some of the Neanderthals are actually post-flood. Textbooks say the earth is billions of years old. The Bible teaches pretty clearly, Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning. Now, there's an obvious conflict between what the two teach. So we have to come to the question, either Jesus knew what he was talking about, or he was lying, or he was just ignorant. He just didn't understand science. And very frequently, if you watch the debates I get in at universities, they will try very subtly to say, they'll say things like, well, you know, the average person just doesn't understand how complex evolution is. And I get up and I say, folks, what he's trying to say is, you're too dumb to understand, and he's smart. And that's exactly what they do. Eric, you run into this all the time. Do you point that out to them? What you're saying, sir, is you're smart and we're all too dumb, right? Boy, they don't like it put that simply, but that's exactly what they're implying. And watch for that. You'll see it over and over and over when you get in discussions on creation and evolution. They try in all sorts of subtle ways to say, well, you know, science is pretty complex, and the average layman doesn't understand it. Yeah, okay, here we go again. You're smart, we're dumb. That's exactly what they're trying to imply. So, Jesus claimed to be God. I like Josh McDowell's thing on this. He says, well, since Jesus claimed to be God, we got three choices. He's either the Lord, or he's a lunatic, or he's a liar. Because if somebody claims to be God, he either is or he isn't. If he isn't, he's either crazy or he's lying. If I claimed to be Napoleon reincarnated, you would know either I am or I'm not, right? Now, if I'm not, then I'm loony. Heard about the guy that went to the mental institution, you know? And this guy is standing there with his arm in his coat, his hand in his coat, and somebody said, who are you? He said, I'm Napoleon. He said, oh yeah? Who told you you're Napoleon? He said, God did. The guy down the hall yelled out, I did not. So, Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning, folks. Now we got a problem here. Was he lying, or did he not understand? There are some Christians going around trying to teach the earth is billions of years old and we can fit it in fine with the Bible. Well, they're calling Jesus either dumb or a liar. Matthew 19:4 is an important verse, folks. You just can't get around it. He said that was the beginning. Textbooks say the earth is billions of years old. Isn't it all through the textbooks? Billions of years ago, millions of years ago, 4.6 billion years ago this happened. Do you think this stuff is taught in our county, right here? You realize there's over 150 churches in Escambia County, Florida? I've heard that the next county, Santa Rosa, is listed in Guinness Book of World Records as having the most churches per capita in the world. I don't know that that's true, but I believe it is. Certainly a lot of churches over there, right? This is the Bible Belt, right? Why, in the middle of the Bible Belt with all these Christians, do we have textbooks teaching something that calling Jesus a liar? When I first moved to town, I went down and talked to Katie Knight, who was at that time in charge of the science curriculum in Escambia County. I wrote letters. I tried to be nice. I went and visited her twice. I said, Katie, why are we teaching this evolution in the textbooks? Look what you have in this book. This says blah, blah, blah. This has been proven wrong 100 years ago. Get that out of the books. She said, Mr. Hovind, you are the only person in the county complaining about evolution in the textbooks. I thought, where is everybody? Isn't our job to be the salt of the earth? Doesn't salt preserve? What salt does, when it finds a bacteria, it sucks all the water out of it and kills it. That's our job. Salt irritates. If nobody's irritated at you, you're probably not a very good Christian. Now, you don't have to try to irritate people. You just try to be salty. That will irritate them. I'm just trying to be salty, that's all. My job is to preserve. And if that means we got kids going to go to school tomorrow morning and be poisoned, I should try to stop that. Right? I just take it kind of personal. And if you think I leave my gorgeous wife because I like being gone from home, you're mistaken. I think part of my job is to be the salt of the earth, and textbooks are destroying this next generation of kids' minds, and it starts with propaganda like this saying billions of years ago. Once you believe the billions of years ago part, the rest kind of comes, well, maybe it happened. Ask an evolutionist, how do you think a dog could come from something that is non-dog? And they'll say, given enough time, that's always the way their sentence starts. Well, given enough time, stop right there. That's all I need to hear. We got a whole section in the notebook about that, about the age of the earth, back on page 10, 11, 12, whatever it is. Their solution is always time, page 9 in this edition. They'll say, well, given enough time. Folks, there's not enough time. The earth is not billions of years old. There are some Christians going around teaching the earth is billions of years old. I have, right here in front of me, a couple of the books by Dr. Hugh Ross. Creation and Time. This one is 2 books put together, Creation and Time, Creator and the Cosmos, and Creation and Time. This book incorporated in here. I debated Hugh Ross on the radio as an hour-long program, but with commercials we only got 30 minutes of talk time in. And we're supposed to have another debate on the John Ankerberg show. I went and visited and toured Hugh Ross's ministry a few weeks ago when I was in California. Hugh Ross is one of the most vocal spokesmen for the old earth creationists, they're called. Those who say, yes, God made the world, however, He used the Big Bang, and the earth is billions of years old. Now, Hugh Ross is a very nice guy. Everybody that's written to me or called me says, oh, he's such a nice man. I used to go to church with him. Oh, and he's such a wonderful man. Now, I don't know. I've only talked to him on the phone. I've never met him. He was in a meeting when I was out there touring his ministry a couple weeks ago, but he may be the nicest guy in the world. Does that have anything to do with what he believes? Aren't some of the Mormons really nice people? Yeah. Aren't some Jehovah's Witnesses really nice people? Sure, no question. Does that have anything to do with them being right or wrong? No. And you got to be careful you don't fall into that trap of thinking, because they're such a nice guy, such a humble person, therefore they must be right. Hold it. That's got nothing to do with right or wrong. I bet some of the prophets of Baal were nice guys. They probably took their kids for rides on the camel. Probably fixed their wife breakfast in the morning when she didn't feel good. But they're pagan, right? And if you want to get into what Hugh Ross really believes, it's very difficult reading his book. I was in the debate with him on the radio, and I said, Dr. Ross, do you believe it was a global flood in the days of Noah? He said, I believe the Bible, and I believe it was a universal flood. I said, what do you mean by that, Dr. Ross? He said, well, it flooded Noah's little universe. It's a matter of playing on words. This book, which we sell at our ministry, Creation and Time, goes through everything he really believes and exposes it. Now, he may be a really nice guy. He's certainly a very smart man. I've seen him on several TV programs, and he's been on Trinity Broadcasting a bunch of times, and he's their, poster boy for theistic evolution, sort of, He doesn't claim to believe in theistic evolution, but he learned all of his science first, being an astronomer in Toronto, I believe, or Canada someplace, in astronomy training, and then he began to read the Bible and try to blend the two together. But in his mind, what the scientists are teaching today can't be changed. We have to make the Bible fit this. He believes it was a local flood in the days of Noah. This book exposes all that. But when you get people who claim to be Christians that are going around saying the earth is billions of years old, there's going to be a division. The Southern Baptist Church today is split down between the liberals and the conservatives over basically one question. Is the Bible the Word of God? And the reason they're fighting over that question is primarily over one other question. How old is the earth? If the earth is only 6,000 years old, like this book clearly teaches, well, then evolution can't be true. Not enough time. Even if there is billions of years, it still doesn't, we don't see dogs produce non-dogs. But the first obstacle the evolutionist has to overcome, he has to have billions of years. And when you get Christians going around teaching the earth is billions of years old, this is the beginning of the problem. We'll get into later in seminar part 4 about how in the 1800s some Christians started teaching the earth is billions of years old when they developed the geologic column. The scientists stood up against Darwin. It was the pastors that supported Darwin in 1859 when his book came out. We'll get into more of that later. Next week we'll talk more about different scientific ways to show the earth cannot possibly be billions of years old. It just can't be. And I think this is crucial, because if you nail it down, the earth is young, it's not billions of years old, then the argument's over. It's over. You win it in the first round. All right? See you next week.